whom we call as Mumtaz Mahal or Mumtaz. So, where exactly she died? What was the situation there? What was the condition? Where was Shah Jahan? Where was her? What happened that night? And what is so peculiar about her burial? What happened after 6 months after the burial? So the novel opens around this chapter. 1982, there is a Taj guidebook by Desai and Cole. They talk about the who might have been the architect and who might not have been the architect. They actually talk about both the things. A Portuguese monk, his name is Father Sebastian Manrique. So he actually visited Agra in 1640, and he actually saw what was going on at the site of the Taj Mahal. And his court and Tavernier's court, do they really reconcile, or there is some difference?
Namaste and welcome to Sangam Talks. All the viewers are warmly welcomed to this new episode wherein we talk about Raz Mahal, the Palace of Secrets. It is a book which is authored by Neil Nathanji, who has studied engineering, information systems, and public policy. He has a long career in IT and managing consulting in the public sector, working for technology consulting and advisory firms. He likes to read and has over time developed a keen interest in ancient, modern, and contemporary history and linguistics. This particular book will be discussed by him, which has also been the award-winning book in the Book Fest of 2022. The author has embedded amazing documentary references on the Taj Mahal and a scientific inquiry of its legend directly into this fast-paced suspense thriller. I welcome you, sir.
Good morning and good evening to the viewers, depending upon where they are. And thank you for the introduction.
Thank you very much, sir, for gracing our platform. And I'm going to directly shoot this your way. You do not have a profile of a writer. You are an engineer and you are a management consultant. And I would really be interested in knowing what your journey as an author has been and why this particular venture came your way. What made you take this decision? And why exactly do you have a pen name?
Great questions to begin with. As you said, yes, your observation about my profile is absolutely right. I never thought I will be writing a novel. Being an engineer, got into IT and management consulting. So I did some writing in terms of, the technical writings, position papers, had some hobby in terms of, light writing, such as, penning one or two poems here and there, maybe writing an article. But I really never thought I'll be writing a long novel. Getting into is, why I sort of, decided to write a novel. The basic answer is curiosity. So a few years ago, I came across some interesting references to the history of the Taj Mahal. And again, public domain references. Excuse me, public domain references. But they piqued my curiosity and interest, as to what does that reference really is telling me. So from one reference to another reference to another reference, so I kept on investigating, kept on researching, and maybe that's where my, consulting IT skills or experience was applied in terms of, researching in a methodic way, collecting the references in a very methodic way, and then kind of organizing them on a timeline, kind of correlating them with each other. So maybe at the end of almost like 2.5 years, I had a very interesting collection of references to the Taj Mahal, about 20 plus references. Then I started talking with my friends and family. Hey, what do I do with this? Should I write maybe a thesis trying to tell something interesting? But that may be kind of a dry, and who will really publish a thesis? And we already have, lots of kind of serious, approaches, kind of maybe a little tense approaches to, investigating history. Then the thought came, maybe I should consider writing a novel. But how do you write a novel? To be honest, I mean, I was an engineer and never written a long novel. But I said, okay, let me give it a try. Maybe I'll write maybe a storyline and maybe have somebody else actually, expound upon it. So I thought maybe I'll write 2 or 3 pages of its storyline. But believe me, I started writing 2 to 3 pages and I have no idea when they turn 300 pages. literally 7 or 8 months went by, and lo and behold, there was at least the first draft of the novel. And of course, it went through the editing process and all professional editing levels. But that's how it came about, and interestingly, it has came out to be very interesting. So yeah, quite a shift from my IT engineering career. But who knows? Life is strange, and it makes you do interesting, wonderful things.
Very well. Again, to sort of ask you again, what is the significance of your pen name?
Pen name is actually just a pen name. I mean, pen name is nothing new about having pen names. There have been many authors, and of course, I'm not comparing myself to great authors, such as George Orwell, which is a pen name. Again, Mark Twain is a pen name. Even in India, there is Gulzar and other who have pen names. So no comparison to them. But just to have a catchy name to go along with. And secondly, I did not write a novel just for the Indian audience or Indian readership per se. I wanted to write something that is kind of international level, so something a kind of a name to go with that. And interestingly, the jury is out there. Some people say, "Hey, why didn't you use your name?" Some people say, "Oh, I like the new pen name." So the jury is out there. So, but so far, so good.
I'm pretty sure writing a novel is going to be very hard, especially writing a novel that is going to take such meticulous research. So, what were your research methods and what were your research sources?
As I said, the research sources, they are public domain sources. So mostly, key internet site, but credible internet sites such as the Internet Archives. Internet Archives are really, kudos to them. They have almost, captured most of the, I'll say, little lofty word, but most of the world historical material and really made available to the public. The Indian government websites are extremely useful. There is a British library that is extremely useful. And most importantly, in the US, here in the US, the Library of Congress, perhaps one of the most amazing collection of the resources. And I used to actually call Library of Congress, and a research coordinator will actually work with me. And actually, he would guide me. Hey, have you looked at this reference? Have you looked at this reference? In fact, there is one particular document. It's a travelogue, and which was not available for almost like 2 months. But the Library of Congress, they made a note of that, and after 2 months, they called me, say, "Hey, your book is available. Please come and get it." So great help. A lot of help from Farsi or Persian-speaking folks. I had 3 colleagues who really understand Iranian colleagues. So in the novel, there are references to Persian quotes. So I wanted to make sure that those quotations are translated correctly. So I had to reach out to Iranian sources and make sure that the translation's right. So really multiple sources and mostly public domain sources, and then a little bit of creative. Sometimes these sources are out there, but you really don't know. I mean, even though they're in public domain, how do you really look for it? So, using a little creativity, there is systematic, methodic organization of the references and then comparing them. So putting a sort of a kind of a consulting hat or technical IT hat around that. That's how it started. But then converting it in a novel, so that's what the first part. Then converting into a novel is a complete different ballgame. Then, of course, fortunately, in my younger days, college days, sort of middle-aged days, yeah, I've done lots of fiction reading too, suspense thriller novel. I'm a big fan of Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, and actually many people have told me that this novel kind of runs on sort of similar lines as Dan Brown. So had learned some tricks of the trade as to what goes well. And then getting into a completely sort of the linguist part of it, how to make a novel impactful, how to make it really sort of appeal to the audience. Because I mean, I was used to writing technical stuff, but that time you don't really worry much about it. So here novel, almost like every word matters, every sentence matters, every connection matters. So I had to learn some of those tricks of the trade. And then, of course, going through a really great editing process, a multi-level editing process. And then what you see is the sort of the end product, which is the novel.
Again, ascending quite steeply, this is going to be another straight shooter. Raz Mahal, you also mentioned Taj Mahal. So again, does this discuss the controversy surrounding the Taj Mahal being a Hindu temple, being Teju Mahal? Why or why not?
So first of all, the first part of the question. So yes, Raz Mahal. And you will see in English, there is a subtitle, Raz Mahal, the Palace of Secrets. So Raz, of course, a Persian word, which is now used by Indian languages. So Raz Mahal, and of course, it rhymes with Taj Mahal. And people who didn't know, when they read this, the title, immediately, they say, "Oh, is it about the Taj Mahal?" So yes, of course, it is about the Taj Mahal. And good question about the Tejo Mahal. So in the novel, you will see two small references to the Tejo Mahal. And there is a purpose for it, and there is a reason for it, but the novel does not delve into the controversy around the Hindu temple and the Tejo Mahal. And why it is so, there is the novel goes around a more fundamental question. I mean, people might wonder what could be that fundamental question. So leaving aside the controversy around Tejo Mahal or Hindu temple, it gets into, or the protagonist in the novel is faced with the question of finding the evidence for the legend of the Taj Mahal, which is Shah Jahan built it for whose name was Mumtaz or Mumtaz Mahal, she was his favorite. It took 20,000 laborers, 22 years, the standard story. So the novel or the protagonist's pursuit focuses around finding the evidence and the legend or the references for this legend of the Taj Mahal, rather than whether it's a Hindu temple or not. So that's why.
What exactly does this book talk about? Without delving much into the suspense, we don't want any spoilers, of course, but what exactly can we expect from this book?
Could I talk about just the storyline, the high level storyline, maybe?
Yes, please.
That might be helpful. So yeah, and thank you. Yes, I won't delve into the suspense, but I'll talk about the storyline. I'm sure the users will and the readers will appreciate that. So it's something, as I mentioned, I was writing a sort of a 2 to 3 pages storyline. So I'll kind of tell you that storyline. So the book, the novel opens in kind of 1700s and 1631 specifically, around the death of Shah Jahan's wife, whom we call as Mumtaz Mahal or Mumtaz. So where exactly she died? What was the situation there? What was the condition? Where was Shah Jahan? Where was her? What happened that night? And what is so peculiar about her burial? What happened after 6 months after the burial? So the novel opens around this chapter. Then the novel moves forward into 1690s, when there is a burglary or a break-in into the Taj Mahal, and the hidden treasure is stolen. But moreover, what happens to does someone make an architectural change because of the burglary? So the novel kind of sort of expounds on that. Then the novel moves into 1960s, when Dr. B.N. Roy is actually researching. He's a Delhi University professor, and he's researching into the Taj Mahal, its origin, its legend, and he is actually dying to present his findings to somebody of higher authority, somebody in a leadership position. So does he find the right leadership? Does he meet with the leader? Then what happens after he meets the leader? What happens to Dr. B.N. Roy? What happened to his research? Where did it go? Was it hidden? Did someone take it? So that's where kind of that part ends. Then we move into the present time. So in the present time, the fictitious Bureau of Archaeology, it receives an RTI petition. As we know, RTI stands for Right to Information Act. So RTI petition asks Bureau of Archaeology, all right, provide the citizens of the country the evidences for the current legend of the Taj Mahal. And we are not really interested in knowing about the Tejo Mahal or Hindu temple. We just want to know the evidence. So one might think this is a kind of a straightforward request. The Bureau should have all the information handy, but Bureau finds it a little strange and a little difficult to how to answer to this RTI petition. So the Bureau leadership kind of conspires and dumps the case onto Vijay Kumar. Vijay Kumar is our protagonist. So he's a nerdy guy. He's an engineer turned scientist and a researcher and a historian. He has an interesting past that has a bearing on his actions. But he thinks logically. He likes reasoning, and he doesn't take anything on the face value, and he has no idea interesting about Taj Mahal or its history, so he has no bias. So he realizes that the case is not that straightforward to answer. And then he is given a team of the team consists of Malik, who is an old timer at the Taj Mahal. He knows everything about Taj Mahal's history. Then there is Sonia Farjani, who is an Iranian descent, but she comes from England as an UNESCO intern. Then there is Samir Seth, who is kind of a young guy, analyst guy, gung-ho guy, technologist. But soon Vijay Kumar realizes that their motivations and what are they really up to? Are they really supporting him? And lo and behold, then there are some mysterious deaths. In fact, a body is found in the lower chamber of the Taj Mahal. So who is that person? How did he get into it? So from here starts a very fast-paced, interesting, thrilling pursuit of Vijay Kumar. He goes around the country, overseas to find the evidences. Has someone really set him up? I mean, is his life in danger? So finally, he comes back and makes his presentation to a committee at the Bureau. So what are his presentation? What did he really actually discover? And how did he present it? And how did the committee react to it? So committee has some, old timers, some, bureaucrats. How are they really reacting to his finding? And then at the end, what happens to Vijay Kumar? What happens to his research? What happens to his colleagues? And what does the Bureau really do with his findings? Did he confirm the legend? Did he come across something different, interesting? So you have to read the novel for that.
That was a very, very interesting plot to actually explore. But I think I would really like to know, what is the purpose of this book? What is, in the grand scheme of things, what is this book a conduit towards?
I don't know whether there's a grand scheme of things. So as I said, it was my curiosity. I came across some very interesting references. They may be public domain, but people may not have looked at all these references in a collective manner. Maybe historians have, maybe the scientists have, but in general public, probably they have not looked at these very interesting references that make up the legend or not. So as I said, how do I share my findings with the public? And as I was talking to my family, so maybe, instead of writing a thesis, maybe writing a novel. So with the novel, people will enjoy the novel at multiple levels. I mean, some people will just enjoy this as a suspense thriller novel. Yeah, maza aa gaya. Then secondly, they will find very absolutely interesting historical references in general history. Then they will find very specific references to the Taj Mahal itself. Then we'll get into, there is somebody who wants to know what's behind the legend of the Taj Mahal. Where is the story coming from? And then somebody might have an interest, what's next? So all of that. So I don't think there is a grand scheme or purpose, but just sharing these interesting evidence with the public, with the general reader, pick his interest, pick his curiosity, present in a completely a different angle to the evidence that makes up the current legend. So I'll say those are my purposes, and again, to entertain people, but at the same time have a strong sort of a reason, analytical base to the whole thing. Some people may notice that, some people may not notice that. It's completely up to them. But I do remember one of my friend's son was actually reading the novel, and actually the references are actually built into the novel. So you can actually, when you read the novel, you can actually look up the reference. Period. So some people might enjoy that too. So multi-level, multi-angle, multiple aspects of the intent.
The main character analyzes the evidence using certain frameworks and methodologies. What can you tell us about those frameworks and methodologies?
Those frameworks essentially are kind of what I use to prepare the evidence and analyze the evidence. And of course, then you want your main character use those as the tools. So the frameworks are relatively simple, and when you look at the frameworks, they seem logical and kind of obvious also. But I'll give an interesting reference later on as to who looked at this framework and how they appreciate it. But for the first, when you do any research, or let's say at the PhD level or even master's level, you're doing a thesis, there are a few things that you follow. That means you look at facts, you separate facts from partial facts, you separate partial fact from probabilities, then you look at possibilities, then you look at theories and hypotheses, and then you look at all these sort of the opinions and beliefs, and I feel this way, I think that way. And many a times, the historical narrative that is presented to us, it mixes all of this. And then sometimes you really do not know what is what. Are we really talking about a possibility? Or are we talking about an actual fact? So the protagonist kind of, he's a nerdy guy, and he puts this framework on the whiteboard in the office and says, okay, yeah, this is how we're going to sort of analyze whatever comes to us. I'm not going to take anything on the face value. So that is kind of one framework. And then he uses another framework where it kind of looks at the historical evidence at almost like a 7 layers of the historical evidence. So and the vertical axis, if you look at kind of the credibility of the evidence on the vertical axis, and maybe a timeline on the sort of horizontal axis. So closer to the left bottom quadrant is where your real truth lies, the facts lie. And then you, as go into the official documents of that era, official court formats, then maybe the letters, maybe then the travelers who made notes of their observation, then getting into the early day historians, then the latter day historians, and then the current government positions and other organizations. So he kind of uses this framework to really analyze the evidence around the Taj Mahal that comes his way. So, and again, this is a framework anyone can use in their life to analyze any particular material that comes their way. So some people found this framework very interesting. And again, this is what happens in offices also. The office environment, people draw frameworks. Hey, this is how we're going to sort of use this. So that's the framework.
So, like I mentioned in your introduction, the documentary references are the foundation of this novel. What documentary references can you reveal to us?
So the documentary references are absolutely intertwined with the story. So how the sort of the suspense evolves, I mean, it goes hand in hand with the documentary references. So even though the documentary references are public domain references, I'm not going to reveal all of the documentary evidences, but I'm going to talk about the topic of those references. And maybe pose those in sort of a question like what. So let's start with almost 1627. So the current history says that whom we call as Mumtaz, she died in 1631, and then Taj Mahal was built later on. But in 1627, a Dutch merchant, his name is Pelsart actually visited that area. Then he wrote a travelogue called as in Dutch language called as Remonstrantie, which was translated by I think W.G. or H.G. Moore as Jahangir's India. So there is an interesting reference. So between the Agra Red Fort and where the Taj Mahal stands, he made a very interesting observation as to what lies in between those two monuments. So what are those? What did he observe? What did he really see there? So I'm not going to tell because it's an important part of it. So he made an interesting observation. Then we move forward. 1632, Peter Mundy, an Englishman. So he was posted in Agra. He used to move in and out of Agra. So 1632, it's very important to look at the timeline. So 1631 is when Mumtaz died. And 1632, Peter Mundy is already saying the places to see in Agra is the tombs of Taj Mahal. So go and figure, 1631, Mumtaz died in 1632, Peter Mundy is already saying, and then he's talking about some ornaments around the grave. So what does that really mean? So you will see the novel and the characters really talk about this evidence, and they try to sort of derive some meaning out of that. Then we moved into sort of the most important quote, what makes up the current legend of the Taj Mahal, which is Tavernier. He was a French merchant. He made multiple visits to India. And he has a very famous quote called as, I saw commencement and completion of this majestic building, which took 20,000 laborers in 22 years. So the entire Taj Mahal's legend is kind of built on this quote from Tavernier. But when did actually Tavernier visit India? So if you think 1631 is when Mumtaz died, and maybe the building of the Taj Mahal started, when did Tavernier actually see the commencement? Did he actually see the commencement? And then H.G. Keane, another historian, then he actually has a comment on Tavernier's comment. Did he actually see the commencement? So how it gets analyzed, you will see in the novel. Then we get into 1640 when a a Portuguese monk. His name is Father Sebastian Manrique. So he actually visited Agra in 1640, and he actually saw what was going on at the site of the Taj Mahal. And his court and Tavernier's court, do they really reconcile, or there is some difference? And then how do we analyze that difference? Then we move into almost like late 1900s when Maulavi Moinuddin Ahmad, he has written a couple of books, and interesting. He has a very interesting reference to the basement of the Taj Mahal and the purpose of the basement. What is really the purpose of the basement and why there is a basement in this mausoleum? Then he almost has almost like a funny reference to the ashes of Shah Jahan and Mumtaz Mahal. Now think about this. I mean, we are talking about a cremation there. I mean, how would ashes be produced? Because Muslims are buried, they are not cremated. So where is the ashes coming from? So you will see this kind of reference in the novel. Another interesting reference then is the later part in like 1982. There is a Taj guidebook by Desai and Cole. They talk about the who might have been the architect and who might not have been the architect. They actually talk about both the things. They refute some evidence as to who might have been the architect, and they try to establish who is the architect and where is the evidence for this architect. So it's coming from a Peshawar Bridge inscription, which talks about a second Lahori guy, not the guy who wrote the Badshah-Nama, but Ahmad Lahori and his grandson, talking about what he actually might have built where Taj Mahal is. Is it the whole Taj Mahal? It's part of it. So there is that difference. And then there's the entire Badshah-Nama. So Badshah-Nama is Shah Jahan's chronicles, but not many people know that Badshah-Nama actually was written by multiple people. There are almost like 3 or 4 segments of Badshah-Nama, and Mullah Abdul Hamid Lahori's Badshah-Nama, there is no clear translation available even now, right now. So where are the real copies? And then I have extracted some very interesting references from the Badshah-Nama that talk about what was really obtained, where Taj Mahal is. What that evidence really means. So these kinds of references is what forms sort of the base of the novel.
That was fantastically described. The novel has published in the US UK market first. So if you were to make a comparison, how is the reaction in the US and UK similar or dissimilar from the Bharatiya responses?
Yeah, the novel was published in the US first, and actually I'll hold it up sort of. So this is kind of the Barnes and Noble version of the hardcover that was published, and then kind of this is sort of the India version, published by Notion Press. The reactions have been very encouraging. Extremely encouraging. People found this very, very, very intriguing. Most of the people, as we know the very basic story of the Taj Mahal, right? The Shah Jahan, Mumtaz Mahal, 20,000 laborers. So people were intrigued, and they said, we didn't know there is so much interesting history around that. For example, my beta reader, Ken Korba, he commented, he said, hey, well, who doesn't want to know more about Taj Mahal? And if you really want to know the history of the Taj Mahal, you read this novel. I mean, that was his comment. Book Life Reviews, it's a fairly balanced book reviewer organization in the US. They had an interesting quote that actually, goes to the heart of the novel or the intent. And they say, this novel is a tribute to the power of science and pursuit of truth in the face of politics and superstition. So I think that this is a very interesting quote, and it's a very telling quote as how the novel was, how it came across to multiple people. In general, very encouraging. And coming to the Bharatiya readers, again, the comment has been, hey, now we want to go back and see the Taj Mahal again, completely different perspective. Yeah. So that has been a very common comment. Another comment has been, hey, so can there be a movie on this novel? And I think so. There can be a movie. I mean, it's been written in a very fast-paced screenplay style novel. So yeah, potentially there could be a movie. People have been intrigued by what happens next. The novel has kind of a few threads unrevealed. So what happens next? So people are kind of looking forward to a sequel also. So let's hope maybe I'll get a chance to work on a sequel. So all all along, very, very encouraging comments, very, very good comments. And then maybe there is a comment about a historian, and we'll talk about that also later.
What have been the comments of the historians or the archaeologists about the several evidence that you've produced through the lens of this main character?
I was extremely curious and anxious to know how historians or archaeologists would look at my novel. Because there is a method in which Vijay Kumar, the protagonist, goes around investigating the historical material that comes his way. And I was extremely delighted. So Dr. Arvind Jamkhedkar, the retired or the former chairman of Indian Council of Historical Research, a really premier organization, ICHR. So he read my novel, and I was actually very impressed and very delighted to receive his comments. So there are a couple of things. First of all, when we talked about the frameworks early on, he said, I really liked your framework. And these are the framework that the modern day historians and archaeologists should actually use to conduct their studies. And I was extremely happy to receive that, because I didn't, write it from that perspective, but he really liked it. He said, yeah, this is how the methodic, research should really go on. So that was one comment from him. And the second comment from him was, actually, it's very telling. His comment was, not only ordinary or common visitors, but even researchers and scientists have questions about the Taj Mahal. And Neil Nathan has answered or tried to answer these questions in a very, very successful and very entertaining suspense thriller way. I think that was quite a delightful comment that I received from Dr. Jamkhedkar. So yeah, but hopefully more historians and more archaeologists will read the novel, and maybe they will find interesting. Maybe they will find something. Maybe they want to question something. That's fine too. But again, as I said, there are two purposes. There is a historical evidence, and then there is the entertainment part of the novel. So it's open for anyone. People can look at it in any shape or fashion they want.
I'm pretty sure, sir, that when you were undergoing research for the novel, you would have sort of understood what these basic doubts are that, as you mentioned, your historian reviewer had also talked about. So, in the academia of historians, what are some of the common questions relating to the archaeology and the architecture related to the area that Taj Mahal is built in? Like you mentioned that there's a basement. What else? What else can we talk about? One of the most famous things that I remember, people speculating is that whether the tip of the dome has a kalash on it, or does it have a moon with a star on it? So what are some of the common things that would make us question the authenticity of the main storyline?
So again, the purpose of the novel is really not to question. And again, the novel focuses more on the documentary evidence part of it, and less on the architectural details. The architectural details, whether they necessarily point to one way or the other, yes, that's a matter of historical scrutiny. The focus of the novel is more about, here's the legend of the Taj Mahal, and do we have enough evidence? Now, whether the architectural details confirm or they point to something different, that's a little different. That's a different topic, in my opinion. So as far as what's on the dome, yeah, the photographs are available. The photographs actually show what you just mentioned. I don't have to really go and sort of prove one way or the other. So what is at the dome? It's really known, and you just mentioned that. So that is there. There are other parts of the mausoleum and the entire complex. So Vijay Kumar actually does the protagonist in the novel. He does observe some of those interesting architectural aspects, but does he necessarily use it for investigating or answering the interpretation? That's kind of a different question. So yes, he makes very interesting observations. So for example, there is a Nagad Khana on the right. So why do you have a Nagad Khana? He wants to know. He doesn't question it, but he wants to know why there is a Nagad Khana in a mausoleum. Are you trying to wake up the dead? He makes a comment like that. And then the basement, the multi-level, the basement. Then what he finds in terms of the arches, what happened to the arches? Are the arches as what they are, or were something different before the arches? The basement of the Taj Mahal. I mean, actually, even Maulavi Moinuddin himself has, had a sort of an interesting comment around the basement. So the large basement, the two-story basement. Then Vijay Kumar finds an interesting hooks cut into the stone at the back of the Taj Mahal, and then he wonders, what is this for? Okay, is it for the boating? Okay, was this a pastime of the Mughals? Who knows? So yes, you will see in the novel there are some very interesting architectural references that are captured, but do they necessarily prove or question the legend? That's kind of left to the reader. But again, Vijay Kumar, the protagonist, focused more on the documentary evidences, because documentary evidences is what made up the actual current legend of the Taj Mahal.
So, in this movement of Indic Renaissance, where does this book find itself? We are in a pursuit of Indic revivalism, where we want the way that history is recorded within the narrative of Bharatiyata sustains itself and thrives. What purpose exactly does this book play in that?
I hope it plays a role. I don't know what role it will play or whether it is necessarily meant to play a role. But I think it can be an extremely useful collection of references. It's a very handy reference. I mean, if you look at 20-25 references in the book, yes, people can look at them. People can put them on the timeline. People can start comparing the timeline. And as long as you keep in a scientific and objective mindset, I think the book can, really provide some very interesting material and basis to the researcher. Not that it's not out there; it's in the public domain. But I don't know whether it has been collected and organized in this fashion. So I'll say it's a leg up to anybody who wants to do further research. And as I said, there is a separation of, the two topics. The Hindu temple and the Tejo Mahal topic is kind of not touched in the novel. It starts with the basics, which is more foundational, is, okay, where is the legend coming from? If there is a legend, if there's a story, there better be a basis. And what is the basis? Now, is the answer to the basis in the architecture? Is it in the documentary evidences? I would think the documentary evidences will help provide the answer. And then once the basic legend or the story is analyzed and the answer points to something different than the current story of the Taj Mahal, well, then you can continue the pursuit, have a scientific methodic approach. Okay, if the current legend is not what it is, what is the true story? So the novel doesn't get into that part. So what? Then what? But it's just kind of focuses on scrutinizing the current evidence. So I'll say yes, it will provide a lot of material, particularly if people have not looked into this fashion. And most importantly is the analysis of the evidence. It's not having a references. In fact, you will see many of the references being quoted by historians. Yeah, this is what happened. This is what happened. This is what happened. But well, let's hold on. So now, look at the evidence, put them on a timeline, compare them to each other. And then see, are there contradiction? Do they really support? And do they really point to the current legend? So I think it could be useful. And as Dr. Zamkedar pointed out, the frameworks that I've used could be absolutely useful. And it could be useful for any other scientific research too.
What is next for you and this novel?
So I hope, because it's written in a kind of a screenplay style, movie style, fast paced, I hope somebody will pick it up for some kind of either movie making or maybe a web series or even a stage play is possible. And the goal would be to share these interesting references, historical references with the masses. I think that can be done. People have asked me about a sequel, so I will say I'm kind of working on the sequel, but I don't know whether I'll necessarily publish it because there are many threads in the novel that are kind of left unrevealed. And that's by design. Just to, pick everybody's interest and curiosity. So that's left unrevealed. So maybe I will kind of, focus on having a sequel maybe in a couple of years down the road. And then this is a completely new venture and new adventure for me. So maybe look at a couple of other historical sites and maybe international sites, and then dig into sort of the references and evidences and see if it can be presented to the masses in a kind of an interesting, entertaining way.
The documentary references that you talk about, who exactly has produced these documentaries that you're mentioning?
The documentary references, there are various historians and observations. So as I said, I mean, Pelsart, the Dutch merchant Pelsart has a remonstrante. I mean, you can look up remonstrante or the Jahangir's India, Peter Mundy's travels, Tavernier's travels, Bernier, who was a French doctor in Aurangzeb's court. He has written his memoir. Maulavi Moinuddin has written a lot of things. Desai and Cole has written a lot of things. So absolutely public domain. So there is nothing secret or hidden about those references. They're out there. It's just that I stumbled upon those references and then kept on researching. Where is the story coming from? Where is the story coming from? So anybody can take up this exercise actually. And then, of course, doing the exercise is one thing, and doing the research is one thing, and then deciding how to present it to the masses in a kind of entertaining story style, suspense thriller. That's kind of different.
Thank you very much for bringing to our notice the book, and through the book, the several evidences that will, like you said, pique our interest in the Raz Mahal, which is the Taj Mahal. Thank you, and we look forward to having more talks like this.
If I may say, I mean, I don't know whether you mentioned, the book has already been translated into 2 Indian languages. So Garud Prakashan actually did the Hindi translation. It was done by Neelab Srivastav from Allahabad or Prayagraj. He has done a really wonderful translation, sort of the Hindi translation, Raz Mahal. So it's available on Garud Prakashan. And then Mehta Prakashan from Pune, they did the Marathi translation. Again, very nicely done by Gauri Deshpande, and they have produced this version, this Marathi version. And so far, these versions are doing well. So hopefully, the word will spread.